we know that language is mostly processed in the back part of the left hemisphere. And although there is some overlap between language processing in direct correlation with speech, in little bits and places otherwise, the majority of speech-based language processing is in the back left part of the hemispheres. So the ability for sound to be processed in a multiplicity of spaces within the brain simultaneously, and to be the only type of intelligence that can actually happen in such a spaciousness, makes it overlap a lot more with all different types of development stages, the processing of information, the way that we end up thinking about ourselves, or especially from more of a existential perspective on what is self. Music or sound takes us deepest, and it would be hard for us to reach certain levels of connection if we didn't have this auditory processing. So the other beautiful thing about sound is that it is pre-linguistic. It comes before language that is speech-oriented. And this reminds us of the origins of sound becoming a linguistic language. Sound had a lot to do with utterance and the origins of humanity. I was chatting with my mom about some of this, and I was telling her that at times people go into these life regressions where things from the past come up, and she was a little confused about that. And also when I spoke about ancestors, she wasn't really sure what I meant, so she asked, like, what do you mean, the ancestors? So okay, I did the more genealogy way of looking at it, and I was like, you've got your parents, and then so then you've got the 4 grandparents, and you've got the 8 great grandparents, and then before you know it, you've got like more and more every generation back, and you've got a whole army of family behind you within like 7 generations. There's a lot of people like chilling right in that family tree. So that's an ancestral tie. And then I went into more of this like deep story, deep history relationship to it. And I said, and then there are those that first were here, and they're the ones that we started this consciousness from. And, you know, the very first ones to just have that expression come through them, whether it was a gesture or an utterance. This is a very powerful way that humans began to communicate. These are the origins, and we can go really deep into this type of an origin in the Innerdance, or this can come up, these very primal, instinctual, primitive like qualities of humanness. Maybe sometimes it's not even just the humanness. You can feel it in more of like an animalistic nature. And so sound in relation to this has been here for so long, and it's a part of how all of this first got started. And then it was funny because I was like, yeah, you know, and then there's theories that the cavemen probably ended up eating a bunch of mushrooms, and that by eating certain mushrooms, suddenly their brains are exploding with all this extra stuff, and before you know it, you've got all these different types of sounds coming out. And so this like this explosion of sound suddenly starts to become language. They're like, oh my God, we're communicating with each other. Our brains are going all over the place. And then, oh, and you make all these, like caveman sounds. And suddenly all of that is like, okay, let's not forget this. Let's keep doing that. Let's keep this going. And now sound is important and we're using it. And we're actually having some type of a language evolve out of this. And then we get the proto-languages or the proto-linguistic times before we started to really fine-tune and refine the way we were speaking, or the way that language has been associated so much with what is verbal or what is spoken that we at times lose sight of how many other languages there are. So music and sound in general helps bring us back to some of these other origins, the points where everything had to be sung in order to be remembered at one stage. So histories were sung, the way you remember where to go if you're a nomadic tribe or a nomadic people. Songs that you sing very specifically at a certain time of the year so that you know which berries to pick and which ones not to pick. Things like this. Everything started off with song as another extension of the utterance. And this didn't necessarily have to have a spoken language to go along with it. It could be just that how you sang that song in whatever tones were being used became a part of that collective conscious memory, and then it started to keep moving. So that if these keys were played or sung or hummed in succession, you would know it. You would be able to feel it. And then there would be times when a mother would very specifically sing a song at a certain time of day, or when you're doing a specific practice. And so now you have this connection to whatever the practice is. Maybe it's grinding up the mace, or turning the rice into flour, whatever it could be, going out into the fields. Yesterday I used the example of time of slavery. Rhythm was created specifically to support that work, because if you were to just be banging on, let's say, like railroad ties, if you're like the slaves that are building railroads, and there's nothing to keep you in a state of rhythm, it gets really tiring. But if you can create a rhythm inside of you, or when whatever it is that you're doing, and then everyone acts together within that rhythm, now there is more of like a camaraderie and or a community, or an ability to see that we're all in this together. And so sound was often used especially to bring about that kind of quality to whatever was happening. And for those that experienced some of the most tension or turbulence in their race or culture on the planet, there's often a lot of song. There's a lot of music that goes along with it, and it comes with such a richness because it got them to be where they are, and not just be obliterated from the planet in a lot of ways. So these origins are super, super strong in our deepest history and our deepest consciousness. And that's why it has this ability to bring up so much inside of us from places we're not even aware that exist, if we haven't actually taken the time to almost like just feel into like, where did it all start? How did it get to be what it is?